first up is Star Trek Section 31, which is a new film out streaming on Paramount Plus. Michelle Yeoh stars in it. She's continuing her role as Philippa Georgiou, which, she originated on Star Trek Discovery. And when they said Michelle Yeoh was going to be in Star Trek, I lost my mind in joy because I love Michelle Yeoh and I love Star Trek. So what a perfect combination. And I am not the biggest Star Trek Discovery person, but I loved her character on that show. She plays this cruel, bloodthirsty empress who gets transported to another dimension and then joins this clandestine, black ops group in Star Trek. And so her morality mixed with the Sunshine and Daisy's attitude of Starfleet is something very fun to play with. She is by far the best part of that show for me. And so when they announced, she's getting her own movie, I was like, yes, sign me up. I want to know about this character's backstory. Sometimes we get hints in Discovery about some of the horrific things basically she had done. I'm like, how did she achieve this position of power? It was so much fun to play with. And there is so much potential depth to the character. And so I went, cool, we're getting a movie. I'm in. Then I saw the movie and I went, oh boy. So I think if you are going to choose to view this, and I'm not necessarily advocating for that, it might help to mentally reframe this less as a movie and more as like an extended side quest episode of Star Trek Discovery or something along those lines. Like, I think if you lower your expectations for being like, this is a film, to that, it might help along the way. I don't know if it's going to help with some of the other things I want to address. But yeah, so I think if you adjust your expectations on that front, from the get-go, I was like, oh no. Because a question I had to ask myself is, do I need to remember anything from Star Trek Discovery? I guess the answer is sort of no, because this film maybe acknowledges that, like, you're like me, it's been a while, or maybe you didn't even watch Star Trek Discovery. So it uses exposition to catch us up on everything. And I'm like, I don't love this as a device. But not only does it use exposition to catch us up, it then uses exposition to drop us into what's going on. And I was like, we have a problem here. It almost felt like, and I don't say this to knock video games, but it felt like a video game tutorial stage where they're like, here are the players. Here are the things you will be doing. Learn your skills. Here is your adversary. Here is whatever, and it felt not necessarily the viewing experience you want as someone who's not about to participate in it. Because in a video game, in a tutorial, you're learning along and then you get to play, right? You get to be part of the story. In this is the method they chose. And then that attitude kind of prevailed throughout the entire script. And I'm like, show me, don't tell me thing, right, is the big thing about films. And they just literally told me repeatedly what was going on. There's so much exposition. There's so much happening. And it's not even an overly complicated story. So I'm like, I think you could have done away with a lot more of this and trusted your audience a lot more, and we would have been fine. The other thing that I will note about this, so Michelle Yeoh is really our only tie to the Star Trek universe prior to this. So in that sense, like, you don't really have to have seen the other stuff because it's not like we're getting other folks from other things dropping in. They do explain what Section 31, which is the name of the clandestine little like spy org, is. That's all you needed, and there is a more elegant way I think they could have done that. Then the rest of the film feels like a bunch of montages where it's like, introduce all the other characters because you've never met them before. But it felt really stilted. And then it was like, okay, let's move to, again, I'm using my video game analogy. It's like the next chapter or the next boss battle or whatever it is. And aside from Michelle Yeoh's character, in part because she is Michelle Yeoh, and in part because her character was given the most depth, and because they were like, we know it's Michelle Yeoh, we have to write for her, I was not invested in anyone. I did not care. They gave us little snippets of everyone's backstories, and I'm like, this feels so surface level and bad. And then the other thing that they were trying to achieve, and I know they were trying, but it just was not gelling, is tonally. They were going, let's go really dark, but not dark enough, actually, honestly, for me. They were like, let's go dark and kind of morose in some points, and then let's try and offset it with this humor that felt more like it should be on something like The Office or Veep or something along those lines. And it felt so disjointed when placed together. And that's not to knock the comedic chops of some of the folks involved, right? Like Sam Richardson is so funny, and they were trying to, I think actually he did the best job of trying to carry that, but there's just, oh my God. Okay. I could go on about this for an extended amount of time, and I'm sad to say that, like, it doesn't deserve it. Now, is it the worst thing I've ever seen? No, absolutely not. Is it good even by the standards of, hey, let's just look at it as a special episode of, a series? not particularly there either. If you are like me and you're like, I need a Star Trek fix because we are between things, the last thing we had was Lower Decks, which I love. One of my favorite things. So sad that it is done. But, if that's the last bit of Star Trek we had and we're waiting for the next bits, okay, you're going to get your fix doing this. Like, my mom is a huge Trekkie. She is the reason I'm a Trekkie. She will watch this tonight and go, okay, I watched it. In terms of, fitting into the greater Star Trek universe that we've built, yeah, I guess it's the most like Discovery, because obviously this is where it's come from. And I know Discovery, like I said, it's not for everyone, in part because I think of what it is doing with the tone. And I think there's like a bleakness to a lot of what's happening that really weighs down the viewing experience. And the other thing is, so this is not to go into spoilers, but they lead off with something like really, it's a strong move. And I was like, ooh, this is unlike stuff we've seen in Star Trek before. I'm on board for this. And if they had stuck with that storyline and it's about her background, I was like, yeah, like double down on this, dive more into this, as opposed to they resort to this sort of like run of the mill, just generic storyline that we have seen other people do better. And it's also like, okay, cool, you've got this. Michelle Yeoh is an action star. Yes, they try to utilize that, but at a certain point, it doesn't serve the story. I love seeing her kick ass and I love seeing her, still take on all these action roles, but I'm like, it has to motivate the story and continue to motivate the story. You can do it as like an action set showpiece once and it's novel, but if you keep doing it, it just becomes boring and then trying to incorporate everyone else again. I think they were also like, oh yeah, I guess we have other actors here. Include them. I'm like, no, honestly, you cannot. You're just making Michelle Yeoh's piece. So that was one of the other things. And then again, this is not to knock too much, but just visually, it feels like they built one really gorgeous set and they're like, yes, this is where we will put most of it. And everything else, like even effects wise, feels kind of pedestrian. It's not terrible, but I'm like, I have seen much better on other episodes of the show. So why are you calling this movie? I think it would have been better to call it a special event. It breaks my heart to do this because it is Star Trek. It's Michelle Yeoh. I want to love something like this, but I have to be upfront about it. I am only going to give this a 2.3 out of 5. And that might be being generous. But if this is the other thing. If this was just like considered a special event episode, I wouldn't be rating it like this because I'd be like, okay, it happened. And then we'd continue on with the story and, get to learn more. And so I think isolating this out in this way really does not help Booster anything. The other film I have this week is called Inheritance. It stars Phoebe Dynevor, who you might recognize from Bridgerton, although I did not recognize her in this at all until I finally looked it up and went, oh, that's who that's supposed to be. It also has Rhys Ifans, and they play a daughter and father who are reunited after an extended amount of time. And then she learns that he also was up to clandestine, sketchy things. There's a little bit of a theme between the two films this week. So she learns that he was up to that, and then she gets looped into his web of messiness. And this is, I think, trying to be an action film, but I did not realize that until about halfway through. It's directed by Neil Burger, who did The Illusionist, which I would say is the lesser of the two magician movies from 2006. Shout out to The Prestige. He directed the first Divergent film, Voyager. So he's not somebody whose name makes me go, yes, I feel strongly about this and I will run to the box office. I'm also not like I will run away from the box office if I see his name on it. So I think the same problem I had with this film, with Inheritance, that I had with Section 31, and I actually saw Inheritance first, is that I don't care about anybody involved. Both main characters act very aloof and kind of cold and somewhat calculated. And I have no problem with that in a character. I think that can be very compelling. The story and the acting has to be good to match it. And I'm not trying to knock their acting too much, but because it is a film that centers so much around just like a very limited set of people to invest in, much like Section 31, I'm like, you have to make me invest if you're going to, take me along this ride. This is also one where I'm like, oh, you think that this action set piece is exciting and motivating, but really what it is stalling and taking a bunch of time. There's supposed to be like, there was a high-speed action chase, and I was like, oh, this is still going. And that's not to say that every film that has a big action sequence has to have something of, like I was saying earlier, like a Mission Impossible. Not everything can be that, but there are ways to achieve that and have a sense of suspense and, investment in a scene like that without having the budget of a major film like that. This is just not accomplishing that. And then there's this father-daughter dynamic that I was like, there's plenty you could dig into here, but it also, much like Section 31, wow, I did not realize that these would be so related, but much like Section 31, so much exposition happening in this and so little trusting of your audience, which is so frustrating to me. And while I admit that I was more inclined to try and be generous towards Section 31 because I love Michelle Yeoh, and, I have nothing against Phoebe Dynevor and Rhys Ifans. I actually think Rhys Ifans is a really good actor. And he's doing his best in this for what he's given. So anyway, it drags along for about an hour, and it's only an hour and a half film. And then finally, at an hour in, it starts dropping in things about the relationship between each other, about like the layers even below what they have, tried to set up as intrigue base level, because they're assuming that just because they are involved in spy stuff and clandestine stuff, like there's an intrigue base level there. But I was like, no, again, if you don't care about any of the parties involved, you don't care. But then they finally, an hour in, start to sprinkle in things. I was like, oh, that would have been interesting if you had moved it to the introduction. And the pacing of this from even individual like sequence standpoints and as a whole film was just so off. And by the time it resolved, I was just like, okay, this was a film that I watched, and it doesn't have anything it can attach to, like a credit to, making an original film these days, but it doesn't have anything it can attach to be like, okay, well, I can compare it and be like, this was just like a medium episode of something. No, it's trying to be a self-contained film. So as a spy thriller or an action film, really not there for me. As a father-daughter family drama film, also not there for me. Is a film that showcases places in the world. Like, I was excited because they go to Egypt really early on, and I was like, oh, I was there. It feels like it's like tourism exploitation where they're like, yes, you should be interested in this because we're showing you somewhere that maybe you have not been before, and that should be interesting and like create intrigue in the film. But no, I feel like I could watch like a History Channel special and be infinitely more interested based on the way that they are representing these places. So not a lot of redeeming things in this film going on, honestly. I am sorry to say, because I do always acknowledge that it is hard to make a film and there are lots of folks involved, and I don't think anybody ever sets out to make a bad film, but this just did not come together in any sort of interesting way, and it also did not have a Michelle Yeoh to anchor it. So I am going to give this a 1.7 out of 5.